The ideas you're about to see about living underwater are real, and some are happening today. But for fun and for further imagination, I've set them inside Nemo's submarine. And similar habitats for living underwater are about to become a reality.
How lucky am I to be touching the frontier, to have the opportunity to be on that blank piece of paper where there is no map.
I came across this National Geographic in an old bookshop the other day, and it really made me think, because it's from 1964 and it has an article about living underwater, in particular the Conshelfs, which Jacques Cousteau, the famous underwater explorer, decided to do in between 1963 and 64. The article is called At Home in the Sea, and it's written in Cousteau's typical dramatic way. I won't do the French accent. I am finishing an enjoyable meal with my wife Simone and a table full of good companions. I light one of my reeking Tuscan cigars and look out of the window at the black, virgin wilderness where moving phantasms barely suggest themselves and where lights that are not lights softly gleam. But it shows all the pictures of how to live underwater, doing things like playing chess and living a normal life in these underwater habitats. And there was the famous starfish, the multi-roomed chambers, steel chambers painted yellow, which sat on the seabed. And those are the days when they thought it was okay to drink and smoke in underwater facilities like this. The most memorable village was Conshelf 2, which was placed in the Red Sea. In fact, there's still some remains of it if you dive there today. And they tested it out for a few weeks. It was pretty fantastic. Even now, you'd say it was science fiction. They even had a little flying saucer-like spaceship, which was the submarine, and it had its own little round, domed hangar. In this article, there's all the cutaway diagrams of how it worked. There have been myths and legends about underwater cities for eons, but it was really only in the 20th century that people started to become serious about whether it was even possible to live underwater. There were several projects, those from the US Navy and others, which did some similar things, but Jacques Cousteau was a great showman, and his underwater village in the Red Sea was perhaps the most memorable. They were pioneering projects, but nothing similar really has been done for over 40 years. There's just one underwater habitat in the world called Aquarius off the Florida Keys, which I have dived, and which is amazing. But it's over 40 years old, and nothing similar has been built yet. But in the course of my work, I met a visionary designer called Phil Pawley, who has designed Biosphere 2 and other underwater structures in a much more modern way. These are amazing structures, and they also show the shape of things to come, whole cities perhaps, under and on the surface of the water. But they're also prohibitively expensive. In the end, it was difficult to raise the money, which is of course the crux of the matter for all these projects. We managed to cost this at about $20 million just to start, and that was probably optimistic. Even so, again, we were using modern designs which let a lot of light in, and Phil looked at various capsules that you could make from transparent new composite materials which were strong and clear, and would make you feel immersed in the water, almost as if you were there without the barrier of the container. So unfortunately we weren't able to make any physical structures. That was about 10 years ago. And so I was really excited to discover recently that there's a project near here in Wales which has just been going for about 2 or 3 years, and it started to make a revolutionary new design for living underwater. The project is called Sentinel, and I was able to talk to Phil Short, the underwater research and training lead for the company that's making it, The Deep. I think that the average person thinks that living underwater is this wonderful sort of village, a bit like Cousteau did with those pictures of wine bottles on the table and cigars. Uh, but
Yeah.
it's not like that. I think it could be like that, but it isn't like that at the moment. Tell me about Sentinel and how you approach that and how it came about briefly.
So the classic photo of the bottles of wine and the cigarettes and the whole team sat around the kitchen table is a bit deceptive because Conshelf 2 was actually also pretty small. So what Deep have done with their ultimate vision, the Sentinel system, is in comparison, the Sentinel is 17 meters long, over 6 meters in diameter. Each segment is ringed by 2 meter diameter viewports. So you're living in something more like a glass house, a conservatory than a metal chamber with a tiny viewport.
Yeah,
You've got
that's
all
good.
that light and all that ocean looking in on you all the time.
Yes,
When you
yes.
finish your dive, to capture your point, you finish the dive, come in, have your lunch, you're still watching that marine life living where it lives, doing what it does through those giant viewports while you're there.
And making you have a more intimate relationship with the sea because you're not in a tin can. You're using perhaps advanced materials which are see-through, which give you much more big light panels.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we've done through the vision of our founder is like we want it to be a big, light, visual area. So basically, Sentinel is made of 3 rings and 2 hemispheres, the end caps. Each of those rings is literally like the diamonds around a wedding band. Each of those diamonds is a 2 meter diameter viewport, and they go all the way around the ring. So wherever you look, for example, the individual bedrooms, not bunk beds in one small chamber, individual bedrooms for each crew member will have half of a full size viewport and then quarter above them in the roof. So when they're laying in bed at the end of their working day, they've got that indigo blue of the night reef water
That's
coming down through
beautiful.
the
That's
roof.
that's lovely.
It is literally a
Yeah.
room of light.
I think that's the key thing. Tell me, if someone was to come off the street and say, "What are you doing? Building something for living underwater?" I mean, how complicated is that? Why do you want to live underwater? What would you say to that person to convince them that it was an interesting idea at the very least? And you'd have to do that before they walked off in 30
Yeah.
seconds.
We all know of the International Space Station. We know that for many decades now, there's been a permanent human presence there. Experiments take place there that require zero gravity, but we're still basically in close Earth orbit. So, not to belittle the achievement. And when you look at our own oceans, the Posidonia beds, the seagrass beds, and other fauna that lives within the sea are the lungs of the world. They basically sink so much carbon, produce so much oxygen, and we know so little about those environments. So, my view is, as a diver, a passionate diver, is to kind of turn that focus in on our own home and learn as much as we can to protect and lengthen our capabilities to stay here before we start looking off into the stars.
The average diver, is going down on a tank of compressed air for about 40 minutes, and they're just getting a snapshot. I've noticed that even if I go to the same place and dive the same place continually, every dive, even in the same place, is different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you take Conch Reef, where you dived Aquarius as an example, seabed depth there is 20 meters. On a single tank of air, you could go out, spend 45 minutes, by the end of which you'd be approaching your no decompression limit, or you'd be approaching running out of your supply of gas. Now, if you go up a level to a rebreather, the rebreather would give you a custom mix and it would extend your capable bottom time. So on a rebreather on that same dive, you might be able to have 90 minutes, 2 hours of bottom time, equally with little or no decompression, and it lasts a lot longer. So you've kind of gone up a step. To go up another step, you've got to think of a way to be there for much, much longer. So then you're starting to look into habitats, which is why Aquarius was placed on Conch Reef. So the scientists studying coral or the astronauts simulating a mission by living in Aquarius could stay down there for 7, 14, 21 days, and each day, at their leisure, at their choice, go out of the habitat and do a 1, 2, 3 hour dive on the reef and then come straight back into the habitat, no need to decompress because they haven't come up. They're still at depth, even though they're now dry inside the habitat. So step by step, you use a different equipment and a different mixture to give you more and more, extend that snapshot you just talked about, increase the duration of that snapshot.
And of course, it will lead to new discoveries. It will lead to new things in my field where I look at animal behavior. You'll be able to, for instance, look at a damselfish and see it guarding its algal patch and see which other predators come for it and things like that. Things which you wouldn't have the time on a normal dive to do. Actually, let's talk a bit about the practicalities of living inside, because you have a closed circuit presumably without air coming from the surface. So that involves things like you'd have in a spaceship or a submarine, where you'd have scrubbing elements to take out the carbon dioxide. And how are you making air? Are you actually adding additional air in there?
Yeah, so basically, you're quite right. The Sentinel system is autonomous, so it basically won't have a surface feed umbilical. It will go down on the seabed for the duration of its mission, able to sustain that mission independently. When we exhale, we produce CO2. A chemical material will remove that from the atmosphere that we're living in. An oxygen system will replace the oxygen we metabolized, and all of this is controlled by an environmental control unit powered by battery banks in a subsea pod that's next to the habitat.
Let's just talk about the safety a little bit, because I'm sure people would be interested to know, lovely looking through that wonderful big window. What if it snaps? Is one of the things they'll be thinking. And let's take that one first.
So basically, from day one, when we started with the original concept design, we decided to bring in an approved classing agent, which classing means testing, to work with us from the basic design of like, we want to do this. Is this possible? No. Okay, how about this? Yes. We're going to do that like this. No. How about this? Yes. So it's the expensive way to do it, but it's the very safe way to do it, because our habitats will be classed for human habitation, rated beyond their usable depth range, so a margin of safety, and have multiple means of evacuation in a wide variety of emergency scenarios. So Sentinel has 4 methods of exiting in an emergency, like, for example, a cracked viewport, as you described. So the 2 prime means of exit are transfer modules on the roof. So it's a dry emergency exit. So the team can evacuate, all the team, 6 people, up through the roof into a transfer module on either end of the habitat. One would be prime, as self-contained, the other would be secondary. If both of those are unavailable for any reason, you've then got the next level of evacuation, which would be through the diving moon pool in the floor, like the one you saw in Aquarius, to a refuge mini habitat on the seabed next to the prime habitat. And if that one was compromised as well, there's an emergency moon pool at the other end of the habitat to go to the same refuge.
So you basically pretty well covered, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also that answers my other question, which was if you had appendicitis and you were saturated and had to go to the surface. So you would be deploying Sentinel all over the world, presumably, where there's a lot of sun. So you could make it sustainable.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the vision of our founder is to basically be ecologically sound and green, to use the modern word. So at our test facility here in Chepstow at campus, all of our boats are electric. All of our submersibles are electric. We don't have any oils or pollutants or fuels down on the water body. And the idea is to design Sentinel and Vanguard to be as sustainable as possible. So systems like solar panels on a surface buoy to transfer power down to recharge batteries are all in the plan.
And what would you do with the human waste? Is there presumably some sort of container for the toilets?
Yeah. So basically, bladder system, which is common in the maritime industry. So you basically have subsea bladders with secondary bladders around them to prevent any possibility of a failure. You'd have fresh potable water in one bladder system to go into the habitat for usage. You then have grey water and black water bladders for the wastewater and waste product coming from the habitat. And then our support vessels would take that to and from the habitat throughout the mission, depending on its length.
So it's been tested in Wales in the quarry.
Yep.
And that's a fantastic test bed, because everything is controlled. But once you get it to a level of perfection, you could perhaps clone some other systems if people were interested in investing, or you could just move that one.
Well, the way we're building it is another really innovative thing. We're not building it through fabrication, we're printing it. So we have a wire arc additive manufacturing facility over in Avonmouth, and there we have 19 wire arc additive manufacturing robots, which, to simplify what they do, it's a robot arm with a robot head. It draws wire in through its body to the tip of its head. At that point, it melts the wire, and then the robot arm moves around and relays that melted wire as a metal print. And you can change wire during the print. So if we print in steel, and then at areas where more strength is required, we determine it's more appropriate to switch to a stronger metal, you can mid-print, meaning that in principle, we could say we want to put a habitat in environment A. It's going to be easier to send the robots there and print it on site before deploying it to the ocean.
So a real 21st century system, which you've got
Yeah,
going there, and
yeah.
that's wonderful too. So actually, another thing is that these adventurous ideas, imaginative ideas, lead to innovations in construction as well.
Yeah, and the thing is about inventive and imaginative are good terms, but basically everything we're doing here, and I've been here 3 years, it's basically science fact and it's reality. So basically all we're doing is we're reaching out to existing technologies that maybe haven't been used in maritime or oceanography, and we're going, you know what? This will be stronger, safer, easier to test, better for the environment rather than sticking with traditional methods.
I want to imagine you lying on your bed after a day's work and being in that habitat, and how you'd feel looking out the window after a good day's work underwater.
I think the whole thing for me is just awe-inspiring. I'm kind of like a little bit of a Peter Pan. I'm the boy that never grew up. Um, I spent 45 days living underground in a cave in Mexico on an exploratory expedition many, many years ago. And people say, how was it like to sleep and live in a cave for all that time? Was it not weird? And I was like, no, I loved every minute of it. And when I was lying there at night just before I went to sleep, I was like, how lucky am I to be touching the frontier, to have the opportunity to be on that blank piece of paper where there is no map, to genuinely explore in the true definition of the word. And I see this as the next step for me, to go to depths of the ocean and places in the ocean I couldn't possibly do without Deep's technology.
Deep's Sentinel project, ready by 2027, is one of the first pioneers of a new generation of habitats. In the future, it may become quite normal to live at the bottom of the sea. At its heart is just to understand the sea better and to spend more time down there. Such habitats are good for scientific research in the ocean, for training astronauts, or for an interesting holiday, an exciting recreation. But there's one more important role that underwater habitats could play. In some places, it could be a very good way to farm. In increasingly stressed, drought-ridden countries, which nevertheless have strong sun.
It sounds daft, but if you lived and farmed just a couple of meters or 10 feet below the water, the light is still there for the photosynthesis of plants, but also it's a stable temperature environment, and the cooling of the water on the outside of the shell, whatever material you're making it from, obviously it's got to be see-through like some kind of underwater greenhouse, that would have condensation on it from the water, the humidity inside the vessel, inside the greenhouse, coming back down, and that would, again, which is really important in the hot countries, save huge amounts of water and probably be very good growing conditions for the plants. In fact, there's a project off Italy at the moment which is called Nemo's Garden, which is made up of some see-through underwater tents which are cleverly constructed, and inside they are seeding plants and seeing whether this idea does in fact work. So I started with the idea that in the glorious days of the 50s and 60s, cost wasn't mentioned. It wasn't the first thing that you started with when you looked at any innovative new project. Today, perhaps, if you look at things like HS2 and all sorts of things that we do, cost is the primary thing that we are worried about. The spreadsheet comes out first, not the ideas. That said, it is really difficult to raise what is millions that is required to make these projects. I think the one we looked at for the broadcasters was about 20 million. That's as low as we could get it. And the idea was that it would travel, be containerized in about 4 containers, so you could take it to very interesting parts all over the world. Perhaps we're in an era where we are indeed going to reimagine the shape of living underwater to give us inspiration about living in the sea in the future.